scientific advancements enable us to stop farming animals for food. Dr. Mark Post at Maastricht University in the Netherlands has created a 5-ounce burger in the laboratory. Dr. Post claims that the burger tastes reasonably good, but it costs over $325,000 to produce. If we can safely and affordably develop meat in a lab, some argue we should stop farming animals for food. Not only will animals not be harmed, they claim, but synthetic meat may be healthier and can be produced in ways that are more efficient and environmentally sound than farm-grown meat. Others, however, argue that if synthetic meat replaces farm-grown meat, this would negatively impact the animal farming industry. Furthermore, there is no evidence that the test tube meat is safe for consumption. Since synthetic meat can be genetically engineered to enhance desirable traits, synthetic meat is subject to the same criticisms as other genetically modified foods. Your question is, should we support the research and development of synthetic genetically engineered meat? Rockwood, your 2 minutes for deliberation starts now. One minute remaining. Time's up. You will now have 5 minutes to present your argument.
Okay. Well, let's start off the idea of why this funding is important. And when you think about it, there's not many causes as to why you should put $325,000 into a 5-ounce burger, and I think it's safe to say at this point that it's a pretty irrational amount. Secondly, it's pretty reasonable to say that the pretty standard food chain that we've had, and I'm talking standard meaning cattle and pigs and things like that, not animals that have got extinct, but the general food chain, I think that it's proven effective over the few thousand years that it's been going, and that we can sustain a relatively simple ecosystem off of that system that we've been running on. And I'll also think it's fair to say that we can move on the $325,000 on synthetic meat, which is, again, they said that it was not proven to be. It hasn't been tested. You don't know the nutritional value in it. It's also fair to say that with that, it might not serve as a viable replacement for actual meat. Scott, you want to talk about that?
Along with the biological effects that putting money into this research would occur, there are economic reasons and consequences that go along with it. With the agricultural department and the farming industry in America, especially in the South, it's very large and it provides a lot of jobs and a lot of what we have. And speaking in a more real-life, personal sense, my grandfather is a cattle farmer. He raises cows, and then he has them sold, and he has them harvested for their meat. And it feeds us and the people who buy it for a very long time. It's how he and his father before him have always lived. And there are many families in America that are like this. And if we were to have this synthetic meat, that's replacing the farming industry that relies on meat, poultry, pork, cattle, and it's putting the factories out of business. And all these people that are loss of jobs are going to hamper our economy. And on the reverse side of that, you can say that this research will create job opportunities for scientists and engineers of sorts. But in the long picture, I believe that this is more harmful because there are only so many scientific jobs that can be given that are being taken away from the farming community. And then I'll turn it to Heather.
With $325,000 for a 5-ounce burger, sure, we can go get the unhealthy, fattening burger at Wendy's for $2.99. That's 15 ounces for all I know. That's going to plenty enough feed us, and that'll support what our body needs to do, even if it's not particularly healthy. With this burger being made in a lab, and we don't even know if it will sustain the protein that we need or the salt that we need to ingest while eating meat, we don't know. And $325,000 for research on 5 ounces of meat that we aren't even sure about could be used for many other reasons, like research of AIDS, research of a better treatment for cancer versus chemo. There's many other reasons for $325,000 not to be used on meat research.
And I'd like to go back to a point that Ryan made. Ryan was speaking of how we've always had a food chain, and when we speak biologically, there have always been checks and balances within nature. And if we were to cut out the meat industry and to have the synthetic product, we would be allowing the populations of these animals, cows, pigs, chickens, to grow because there won't be natural predators to attack them. While chickens will have foxes and weasels still attacking them, they won't be killed off in the same manner that they are now, where it's thousands being killed every hour. And I believe that that's something that we need to think about when we are talking about supporting this research and development. Thank you.
Farragut, your 1 minute for deliberation starts now. Time is up. You now have 5 minutes to respond.
All right, thank you so much for the points you raised, and we will try to provide some comments that will further this discussion. First of all, we really felt that the research and development is a positive thing for several reasons. First of all, I think one of the most central reasons that would be true is that the idea of being able to mass produce food means the idea of being able to mass produce away global hunger, which is certainly a long-term goal, but nevertheless a possibility. and a much more tangible possibility than if we were to just keep our current sources of food production. You also mentioned the relevance of the sort of draining of this particular industry in the economy, which is true to an extent. However, there will still be demand for natural meat, probably forever. But you mentioned specifically the American South and the economy that relies upon the farming industry, which is true. And I mean, it's first important to point out that the economics is not necessarily tied to the ethics of this question. However, new industries will almost certainly arise. In the production of this new meat, you're going to inherently have new fields that become a part of it. And you kind of look at the book publishing industry as one that recently has also gone under. But new fields have opened up in the world of online books and online medium. I mean, industries replace industries, and that's just the nature of development.
One thing I noticed that you all mentioned in your argument a lot was the price and how it was unrealistic. Like, oh, you're going to spend $325,000 on a hamburger, and you can go to McDonald's and buy it for $1.99. But you have to remember the first computers were ridiculously expensive, but once you start mass producing and commercializing them, the price will naturally lower, so this problem will just solve itself.
Rockwood, your 1 minute for deliberation starts now. Your time is up. You now have 3 minutes to respond.
You brought up very valid points, and one of them that we would like to further discuss was the point you said where mass producing food, as we are now, and how it can affect taking away global hunger and how that's a goal that we are trying to work to. In America alone right now, we have enough food to feed the entire world. We throw away so much of it. The problem isn't that there's not enough food. The problem is that it is so unevenly distributed. And with the synthetic meat that's going on, I don't see a viable way of how it's going to help the goal of taking away global hunger, as the third world countries aren't going to be able to do these things. And so as a first world country, we will have it, they won't. So it's not necessarily working towards that goal of ending global hunger. And another point that we would like to discuss is the nutritional value of the synthetic meat in question. And Ryan will talk more over that.
I thought your ebook analogy was really interesting, as that being the definition for development. I thought that was really cool because it's a really good point on how development actually works. But the interesting thing about the ebook is that it, in a lot of ways, is much more efficient than the actual book. And with this untested synthetic meat, we're saying it's unethical because there hasn't been any nutritional value or any kind of safety standards that have been tied with this synthetic meat. And, what is the safety of it? How effective is it? And how much of a viable replacement is it going to be for this food system, which has, I get the food system has always worked, just in the same way a book has always worked, and how the ebook has came in and served as a more efficient process. But I'm not necessarily sure that the synthetic meat is a more efficient way of going about changing our source of meat.
Also with the understanding that, of course, over time, the price will go down, like you mentioned with computers. The price of the burger would eventually go down and comparative $1.99 to a first world country. But that's still too much for a third world country to ever have to them. They would have to have it shipped over. They would have to have the source. They would have to have labs. They would never have that. And the original research would be done here and never be given to them. We do have the different programs that do send food to the third world countries, but this would just never be a viable source of food or to end global hunger. The question, the original question, should we support it to reach that?
We will now have 10 minutes for judges to ask questions.
So I'll open up. So you spent a lot of time in your discussion talking about the economic costs and effects on human beings and farmers and people who might be adversely affected if we were to make the alterations in the agricultural industry. But one of the central moral dimensions that strikes me that I don't think has been addressed, which I'd like to hear you elaborate on, is one of the people who would be advocating for this kind of research are people who are concerned about the animal suffering and about the billions of animals that are raised in factory farm-like conditions, raised in cages and given antibiotics and bred for the sole purpose of human consumption. And the thought is that the living conditions that the animals have are really bad, and they all basically exist just to die for our consumption. And the thought is, this gives us a way to create meat without all that animal suffering and death. And that seems, these folks, really important. So my question is, to what extent does that factor in to whether or not we should fund this kind of research?
The problem with that, I believe, is that it's not so much the farmers that are the ones that are doing this. It's the big production companies that are giving them these terrible conditions. And while the animals' conditions should be taken into account, I believe that that's more of a concern for upgrading our laws of how we take care of things, not so much on the debate of if or not it is ethical to continue killing them for this research.
Well, so the problem, though, is so suppose we make those regulation changes, right? We make it all free-range farming. So if as a family member who engages in what I understand to be free-range farming or localized non-agriculture or non-industrialized agriculture, the problem is if we do that, if we make that the norm or standard like that, that is going to be better for the animals. But then you're not going to, the worry is, will you be able to produce enough meat to meet the needs of the population? And that seems to be a point that was one of your worries about the funding, right? Of why we shouldn't put the money into this research, because we may not be able to produce enough meat this way to fund the human population. So here, if we make so here my worry is if we make those changes, then doesn't the same concern arise, right, for your proposal?
I feel that with slaughterhouses mass producing cattle to just be killed for the sole purpose to feed us, since that's a cheap, cost-effective way, but it's also wrong to treat the animals the way that they're being treated there, and free range is the most ethically responsible treatment of animals, I feel. That is one of the things where, as slaughterhouses die away, more farmers with a smaller budget could start free range harvesting of animals. There'd be a growth in the small farming community and a decline in the slaughterhouse community. And that would even out the meat expectancy level.
Maybe just a connected question to that, if it evens out, if that's a true possibility. It seems like even if it were to provide enough meat to actually feed everybody, it seems like it would then become for these farmers to not have their business any longer. But it seems like it would be no longer cost efficient lot that sort of meat knows, it's naturally more expensive, double the cost often, and so that's going to be cost prohibitive for people to actually be able to have access to this.
That was actually a big issue that we had. We didn't want to, when you're doing that, you're creating the bigger gap than we already have with industrial produced meat, because it's okay to say that the synthetic meat will be industrial produced, mass produced. And the relation between that and then our American soil and what's happening on here, there's strengthening the gap between the big man and the little man with our economy.
And with the growth of more small man farmers, then there'll be more competitive price on the free range market. It wouldn't be a huge spread out free range farmers being able to control their own prices. It'd be a condensed competitive market.
So I have a clarificatory question. You had mentioned that I think at one point you phrased it, it wouldn't be ethical for us to take the synthetic meat direction. But for your position, you would only need to argue that we are not obligated to do this, that we shouldn't have to do this. Because I mean, really, the question is, should we support the research and development? And we clearly don't think that, but we shouldn't have to support this. So just to clarify on your position, is it that you think that it's just simply not obligatory that we do this, or do you also critique that you say that it would actually not even be permissible for us to go in the synthetic meat direction?
Right. I don't think it would be permissible as well. And I should have said that. I think that when you're that as well as like being obligatory and supporting it, it's it's just a matter of necessity mostly, and the efficiency of whether this will work or not isn't necessarily relevant. And I think that like especially relevancy will play into supporting it. It just shouldn't be supported, especially because of the nutritional value, which is uncertain, and the uncertainty of the synthetic meat is our biggest issue against the support of it. It just doesn't, it hasn't, there's no true understanding of it, of what it can do, and the system we already have is so effective. I mean, the food chain is, it's effective, and the farming is so effective. Granted, there's the slaughterhouse issue, which we discussed. Everything else so far has been effective, and again, America's supply of actual food to feed the rest of the world isn't, I don't think that plays into, because what developing country is actually going to have the ability to buy the synthetic meat that we're mass producing and that we're going to sell them for an extremely outrageous amount? Unless we're going to start some nonprofit that's going to allow them to purchase the synthetic meat and push to the developing countries. There's not much effectiveness in that.
I guess then I'll just ask then another follow-up to address another point you made. So let's just say we'll proceed hypothetically here. I know your position is that we can't be certain about the synthetic meat at all, and that's why you conclude that it's also impermissible. But let's say that we could, enough scientists get it going, and they do answer the question sufficiently that we could proceed in this direction and be all right. And one thing you've mentioned is about regions being affected, like for instance the South. If society thought, hey, it would just be a fair shake to offer the predominant meat industry and all the people in that sector, they should have the first opportunity to invest in this synthetic meat. This is the direction we're heading into the future. Would that be all right if they got the first shot at synthetic meat? If we could show that it was okay, and they were going to get the people who are already invested in this industry, they got first shot. Would that be all right?
I would say so. I would say as long as it's proven effective and is, there's no behind the door deals going on between the prices of which this will be sold and how, is this going to be sold cheaper to the industry, it's going to be sold more expensive to the actual markets. Factors like that playing in. I don't see why that would be a problem if it's been proven effective. And the question supporting the research of it, if there's some group of scientists that came together and did a startup on getting this meat to work, I don't see what the problem is.